They got it put in, and then we fried some kind of circuit that had the speakers up there in front of you guys, with monitor speakers that are in front of you all.
Yep.
So then they went in, they found that issue, they corrected that, and they tweaked a couple of things. When they would come in and work on the sound, they would work on the sound without the air conditioning on. And so then all the people would get in here and the air conditioning would come on, and then you couldn't hear anything again. So then we had to turn it down to like 60, so the air conditioner would be on, so we could.
Yep.
So it was quite a deal.
Are we expecting anybody else?
No, she's gonna go grab a couple of things real
Okay.
quick and then we can get rolling. You don't have to sit back there, you don't want to. Mike told me I wasn't allowed. Come up here, and I want you back there in case they have questions for you. I don't know if you all know Dave. Dave is our city engineer with Cochran Engineering currently. He's responsible for most of the portion of the agenda that was hard to read.
Good
Not
job.
taking any credit.
Thanks for the introduction, Gary.
Actually, these guys have been great to work with, so it's been great for us.
Let's call the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Osage Beach to order. First order business, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Want to do roll call?
Bill McKay,
Here.
Alan Blair,
Here.
Gary Jones,
Here.
Angie Schuster,
Here.
Nancy Vasselli,
Here.
Chairman Susan Ebling,
Here.
Mayor Michael Harmison, Tony Kern,
Here.
Jessica Rozier,
Here.
Alderman Bob Osteen,
Here.
Bill Morgan,
Okay. Do we have any comments on the minutes from the May 10th meeting? If there are no comments or questions, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We have Commissioner Morgan coming in. I think tonight I'll skip reading what our job is since it's just us here. And we'll move on to the new business. The first order of business is additions and amendments to Chapter 405, zoning regulations, Article 9, off-street parking and loading requirements, and the design guidelines and information packet. Carrie, want to take over?
Chairman, well, for those who have been here for a while, you understand that this is kind of the time during the year that we end up kind of taking care of these housekeeping issues. There's not as much development and that type of thing going on, so it gives the city and our staff the opportunity to go back and kind of take a look at some of the things that we are doing and enforcing, and do some updating when we have the opportunity to do so. In this particular case, what we're looking at today is based on the parking, okay? In this particular situation, what I will tell you is that we had an issue with a property that was in an industrial zone, and they had been given a a certificate to occupy and do business. And at the time, our building department and our inspectors were out of the office, and the fire department did our final inspection for us. Well, one of the things that the fire department doesn't really do, because it's not their thing, is make sure that the parking lot is the way that it's supposed to be. So for a little while, it went unknown. Then when we got back to that business owner and said, hey, you're required to have hard surface parking, you were approved for hard surface parking, they weren't wanting to do so. So basically, we ended up citing them. We took it to our city attorney, and while he and the building official were looking through it, they found a little line within the design guidelines that said everything will be paved or hard surface, and then in quotations, except for properties zoned industrial. And I know exactly what they were thinking. They were thinking that give them the ability to be flexible with the industrial, when in actuality, when read by the attorney, said, if you're in industrial zone, you don't have to pave anything. The problem is within our code, our light industry zone allows everything within the general commercial zone as well, okay? So in our light industry zone, you could actually have a restaurant or a school or a medical office or something like that, and that becomes a real problem, okay? In communities our size, everything from multifamily housing through commercial into industrial and then public uses need to be hard surface parking, okay? And the reasoning is because it provides a more consistent and sturdy driving and walking surface. It also allows us to better handle drainage, which is a real issue at the Lake of the Ozarks because of our topography. And then it has other parts to it, like, aggregate surfaces have dust. Your neighbor, if you're in a commercial zone, is not going to want their stuff covered with chat dust and their customers covered in chat dust if you have a chat parking lot. So the bottom line is what we have in front of us today was a request from the city attorney that basically said, we need to make this more clear. I know what we've been enforcing. I know what the intent has been, but it doesn't say what we're wanting to say. And so that's when myself and Dave went to work in separating the what from the how, okay? So what you'll see in here is you'll have the addition and amendment to the zoning code, which is actually the what, okay? What do you have to build with how many parking spaces? And then the how in the design guidelines, which is how do you build that once we understand what you need. Okay, so we separate the two different documents. The function of what you have in front of you today, from the zoning code perspective, is you'll see the removal of some things from the existing zoning code that basically address construction. We didn't want to have construction both in the zoning code and in the design guidelines. It's redundant, and that's how you get into trouble, because you'll end up changing it in one, forget that it's in the other, and we have problems. So the function of what we have done is we have taken those things out that were redundant between the two. We changed some wording in what was formerly called the handicap space requirements. As you understand, currently handicap is not something that we use in today. So it's ADA parking space requirements. And of course, we took a lot out of that, basically because we go by what the ADA current requirements are whenever we do handicapped or ADA parking, okay? So we don't need to have something that spells it out separately within our code. And then on the improvement in parking areas and parking lots, I'm not gonna read that all to you. I'm quite certain that you've read through it, and if you have any questions on the wording or what it means, that you guys are more than capable of asking that. So that is what we have within the zoning code. And then within the design guidelines, which is the stuff that is a little harder to read. And it's harder to read because this is exactly how it appears in our design guidelines. So Dave did his best to illustrate what we were removing and what we were replacing it with. And then the back copy that doesn't have any red within it is just a clean copy of what it will look like when it is done. Okay? And so with that, I will give it to you to ask any questions that you may have about what we have done.
Commissioners have any questions? For Carrie or Dave?
I do. Going back to the section 405.6, right off the bat on the section A, it says in all districts. Should that be clarified in all districts within the city limits? Or what districts are we referencing?
Well, in all districts within the city limits is all that we govern. That is not actually something that we're changing.
I'm just saying, do we need to clarify what you mean by in all districts?
All districts is all zoning districts. That's what that
Well,
means.
that's what I'm saying, is maybe we need to clarify that.
It's in the zoning code. So I mean, we could, but it's inherent in being in the zoning code
Okay.
that it's talking about all zoning districts.
I just thought it seemed a little open-ended.
Okay.
That's why I was trying to clarify exactly what we mean by the districts.
Yeah, all zoning districts. is
Okay.
what that-
That's
Any
all
other
I had.
questions?
Oh, come on, something, anything, make Dave earn his money, I mean.
I know we're super excited about parking and all.
The thing of it is, and, I told some of the folks that got here a little earlier, some of these things seem a little bit remedial and redundant, but by state statute, it's required to come
Yep.
through this board. It's required to have a hearing, in front of this board for the public. These things, while it seems like stuff that we, the staff are the ones that deal with, it still needs to be heard by you all. And quite candidly, it's things that you all can catch that sometimes we as staff who do it every day, there are things that we just miss. So that's why these things are required to come to you. And quite candidly, there will be some more stuff pertaining to sewer and water that will come before this board in the next few months as well, as we try to catch the design guidelines up to our new engineers and our new public works leadership. So
I got a question. So under the design guidelines, residential parking, commercial parking areas, line 1, and I might be reading this wrong, says each resident property owner shall provide off-street parking. Then specific in City of Osage Beach City Code Section 405.480, off-street parking on city streets will not be permitted. So that's sort of,
It's the same thing. It's saying you will provide off-street parking, which is off the street, and the other portion says you can't park on the street.
all right. Like I said, I was reading it wrong then.
Now, I will say that there are portions within the city that the city can actually do ordinance that will, one, put up signs that says you can't park, no parking on streets, but then there's also places that they could do ordinances to allow us parking on the streets, which we have a few. So, but in general, you can't just assume that you can park on any of the streets within Osage Beach. Because we can get pretty tight around here in some of these streets, so.
So Osage PD is supposed to enforce that one, correct?
Yes, yeah, that is a Department of Public Safety issue, yep.
All right.
And we can, I mean, if it's a big issue, that's happening consistently at a specific location, and the police department is off doing, more, emergencies type stuff and they can't get to it, then we can handle it with the compliance officer later. They will contact the ownership saying, hey, we're having a problem with, people parking on the street at your location. Will you please keep them from doing that? And that's happened a time or two at some VRBOs or what have you, and we take care of it pretty quick.
Carrie, I do have one more question for you, which I don't see referenced in here. What is our city code regarding number of spaces per unit in a multi-unit development? I.e., a 25 condo complex is required to have how many spaces? 2 per unit? 1
What-
per unit?
Yeah, so it depends on how many bedrooms in the units. So anything 2 units and above requires 2 spaces for the unit. If it is an efficiency unit with 1, you're required to have 1.5 spaces.
Okay.
So it'd be, obviously if you had, which we don't have a lot of 1 bedrooms, but the few that we do, you end up basically with 3 per 2 units. So, But yeah, that's what we require for condos, apartments, anything multifamily.
How does that cross over with ADA compliance?
Well, you have to have the same number and 2% by ADA requirement of your entire parking needs to be ADA accessible. So, that's not a large requirement. Most places meet, far exceed that. So you would have to have 2 of your spaces for a 100-space situation.
So going back to smaller, I'm just thinking about condominium complexes, going back to like a 20 unit, 25 unit,
One space.
one space.
One space will be required. Most of them will have more than one.
Just
And then
curious.
there are complexes like, that are already here that don't follow those guidelines at all, not even close.
I know.
And they can't.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah. And those are things that go through the building permit process. We look at the site development plans, and all of that is shown on their site development plan. And when we go out to do the final inspections, we make sure that they meet what has been approved by way of the ADA. Now, if they're required to and they show 2, but they've decided to do 3, that's fine. But they can't have less than what they're approved. Yeah.
I would say these changes put the city in a better position to enforce that also, because with these changes, you're just falling back to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that leaves you the whole, it's a book this thick, that any section out of that we need to use to enforce and development, we can use now by this change. So I think that's a good change for the city.
So Carrie, when you're talking about the parking spaces in a condo unit, if it's a 1-bedroom, it's 1 space,
If it's a 1-bedroom, it's 1.5 spaces.
1.5?
Yeah.
So for every 2 bedrooms, you need 3
Yeah,
spots.
I knew with the 2.
I mean, 2 1-bedrooms, you need 3 spots.
Yeah, but the 2-bedroom and above is 2 spaces.
Spaces, yeah.
So, but like a 1-bedroom needs 1.5.
Yeah. We don't, like I said, we don't have many 1-bedroom anything, but we do have some apartment complexes that have, a small number of 1-bedrooms. So, that adjusts their amount of parking. But to be quite candid with you, the vast majority of them still max out the amount of parking that they can get and will go above that if they can,
Any other questions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
A second.
Motion and a second.
Do a roll call.
You want to do a roll call vote, Ed?
Yeah, do a roll call.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Bill McKay,
Yes.
Alan Blair,
Yes.
Gary Jones,
Yes.
Angie Schuster,
Yes.
Nancy DeSalle,
Yes.
Chairman Susan Ebling,
Yes.
Mayor Michael Harmison, Tony Kern,
Yes.
Jessica Rozier,
Yes.
Alderman Bob Osteen,
Yes.
Bill Morgan,
Yes.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. We have a second item on the list tonight for discussion, that is additions and amendments to Chapter 405 zoning regulations, Article 5 signs.
Yes, so if you'll remember at our last meeting, we did an approval to enlarge the size of LED signage for large-scale properties in commercial zones. And as part of that, one of the Aldermen Rucker, just came up to me after we did that meeting and asked about, do we have anything that controls the illumination on those signs, okay? And I was like, we don't have anything in there yet, but, I think we can all remember digital signs that we were driving at night and came around the corner and we're like, oh, can't see, kind of thing. And the basics of it is, while most of those have a governing sensor that as the sun goes up and down, it changes the amount of light that goes on and off within the sign. It's one of those things where I was like, well, let me at least check into it, because I think if they end up with a broken sensor, a lot of times maybe they won't get it fixed and they'll leave their sign on, and it can become a safety issue, which is something that we definitely do not want. So the basics of it is I contacted MoDOT and their outdoor signage department, and I contacted Lamar Advertising. just to see, kind of what their perspective on it is. And it kind of shocked me a little bit, but Lamar Advertising thanked me profusely for considering this because they have problems with competition who don't go in and control their illumination on their signage. And basically their point was it gives us all a bad name, when any of the signs, because most people don't separate one company from the other.
Yeah.
And what I found is MoDOT has a requirement, and I know this is going to go way beyond our knowledge because it goes beyond mine. They have a maximum requirement of 300 nits at any time. And basically what a nit is it is a measurement of illumination that can be tested with a gun that they have by pointing it at the sign to see how much illumination it is putting off, okay? And in talking to the other sign companies, basically what they told us was they do have that eye that governs their lighting, and that during the brightest portion of the day, they would be somewhere between 280 and 300. But at night, once the sun goes down, they go down to something below 100 by way of their governing eye, if you will, the mechanics of their own signs. And while working with them, what I came up with and felt like would be something that we could use and that would be fair and that would cover us if we ever have a sign or signs that become an issue, is to put a requirement that says basically during the day it would mirror what MoDOT has, which is no greater or a maximum of 300 nits. And then after dusk until sunrise, no greater than 100. Okay, that's fair, it's flexible, it's above what most of them have at night. Gives some flexibility to those who have those signage, but also gives us the ability to control it again if we have an issue. It's a little bit like a speed limit. You have a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit, and as long as people stay close, at least you have something governing some speed limit, or is governing the limit. And that's kind of the same way that we have in a lot of the codes that we have. It just, they only become necessary or we have to use them when we have an issue. And we hope we don't. But I think that this provides us some control and allows us to make sure that we don't have any safety issues within our community caused by these signs. And with that, I would recommend putting this into the sign code.
Carrie, is this the only thing that was changed on this page, was the number 11 where you talk about all that?
Yes. So the only thing that has changed is in red.
Mine
and
didn't. Mine's not in
Ours are all
red.
black.
Ours are all black.
Yeah, that's
We
why.
didn't get
I-
anything in red.
That's why it's,
So we have no idea what.
we don't know what's different.
Okay, so
Okay.
that's why I asked that question. Is there any other changes?
Oh, when the scan or the email would be red.
Oh, okay. So when we send it to you by email, I guess that would be red. And from now on, we will send color copies, hard copy.
There you go.
Man, you're killing me.
That-
I
Yeah,
have one more question for you, Carrie, then.
Yes.
On this sign, on the thing, number 8, where it says, even though that's not what you're talking about, it's more lights, but obsolete signs remaining 30 days after they become obsolete. Can you explain that? Because I know we have a lot of signs that are grandfathered around here.
Right.
An open house sign that was left up.
Oh,
A for sale sign that's been there for 3 years.
yeah.
That kind of
Anyway,
stuff.
when they're
Yeah, and I mean,
obsolete.
there is, it would also, it's kind of one of those things where strictest interpretation of the code, if you moved your business out and your business hadn't been there for 30
Like Golden Door
days,
Motel?
You would have to remove that lettering and that kind of stuff. I mean, yeah, but in typical, it becomes an issue and we use such things if the sign becomes a problem, by way of aesthetics or visual or safety.
Do you think you're
purposes.
going to address some of these signs that have been obsolete for years and years and years?
Well, I mean,
Would they be
it's
grandfathered
kind of
then?
one of those things where the signs
I don't know what she's
themselves
referring
and the
to.
structures themselves are still usable and are usable by the properties, okay? So if we go out and address them, it would just be to paint over what's there or take the letters down. We wouldn't require them to take down the signs themselves or the structures, because
Think all
those,
the off-premise signs are down, that no longer, the businesses no longer exist?
what off-premise signs.
Well, you know, where they're advertising along Osage Beach Parkway, there used to be signage, I'm not gonna say a specific thing, but
Yeah,
there
that's
used to be
good.
signs that, for some resort that was down the street, that are no longer there for years, so are those signs still going to
Well,
stay up?
we've
if
had a
they're-
lot, we've taken a lot of those down, but,
But-
yes, we can address that.
I think that one of the things you got to consider with this, as we discuss this, is those businesses are no longer entities. So if we're looking at removing the signs, who's incurring that cost? Basically, that puts it back on the city to incur the cost of removing that sign. So if it's not necessarily, like you're saying, a hazard of any sort or impeding any other business, et cetera, we walk a fine line on saying, hey, we need to get rid of all these signs, like the Golden Door, that have been here for years, even though the business no longer exists. But like I said, but at what cost? Who's going to incur the cost and labor to do that? It would be the city. And that's not something that's currently budgeted to address.
Well, and some of the signs like Golden Door, I know why they left it. They left it because of our sign code, because of the structure. They wanted to keep it, blah, blah,
Correct,
blah. I
correct.
understand all of that. I was thinking more of the, open house for
Temporary
sale.
signs.
Temporary signs, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of those sections within a code that is, again, in there so that we can address kind of the worst-case scenario a lot of times. But, the function of what we typically do is we allow sign structures to stay so they can be used again by the next business that goes in there. So, what portion of it makes it obsolete? Is it the name on the sign? I mean, I guess, if it was a real issue, and basically kind of one of those things, if the Board of Aldermen wanted to have our compliance department,
That's,
start going after those things,
I was-
then we would. In the meantime, I think it's kind of one of those, you have a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit and everybody goes 65, but we don't pull everybody over kind of thing. But if it becomes an issue, that's in there so that we can use it to address some of those issues.
the P and Z board can always make a recommendation to the Board of Aldermen to have the Public Works Department do an inventory of obsolete signs. And as such, also what would be the cost incurred if the city were to remove those signs, which is something I think we as a board, the P and Z board should pass on to that board.
Well, and it becomes,
Not that it's a dire or excessive need right now, but it's something that,
It's an option.
something to get, just get something in the works, saying, hey, let's really take a look at the city of Osage Beach. How many signs are still up there for businesses no longer
Well,
existing?
but there's a lot that goes into that too.
True.
It goes further than that. When the city gets involved, the first thing that we do is write citations, and then it goes to court, and ultimately, the judge would be the one that would tell them they have to take it down and give them a certain amount of time. And then if the city was to get involved, then we're going on private property to do different things. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it.
Well, it's just, in some areas, it probably needs to be addressed in the city, and probably should have been a long time ago, but that's just my opinion.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. What's the definition of a temporary sign?
It's a good question.
Good question.
Well, it
I've
depends on the sign.
I've always wondered.
It depends on the sign, it depends on the location, okay? The definition of a temporary sign is a sign that is not permanently affixed
Fixed.
to ground or to structure. So banners, signs, realtor signs, any of those directional signs, those are temporary signs.
And how long can you have a temporary sign?
Well, it depends on where it's at.
Temporarily?
If it's in the right of way, you can never have those, but we don't have somebody that goes around and pulls them, on a daily basis either, so they get put out there. By strictest interpretation of the code, 10 days is the most that you're supposed to have a temporary sign. That would be for like a specific event or a specific sale. Banners on gas stations, are only supposed to be there for 10 days, but you get another banner, and again, honestly, with one compliance officer, we don't drive around and go, That's the same Coors Light sign that was there 15 days ago. So those kind of regulations, again, while we have them, and, you know, we try to make sure that we don't have something that is, you know, grossly out of conformance. You know, we also aren't at this point a compliance group and an enforcement group that goes around and starts pulling signs that we know have been there more than 10 days.
Like MoDOT used to do.
Well, MoDOT didn't allow anything in their right of way, and in typical, we try not to either. I will say this is probably the worst year for political signage that I've ever seen. But that gets a little greasy as well. You know, when they call, the ones who call and ask the city, how do we do signage? And there are plenty that do. We tell them, you know, basically, we understand, one, there's not a whole lot of grass to put signage in Osage Beach. So the majority of the businesses that have political signage in front of them, it probably is in the right of way, but we ask that they keep it as far off the road as possible, as to not create any issues with the site triangles or anything like that. But for the most part, they try to keep it back behind the light poles, you know, and the electric poles. And then in typical, if they get it a little bit too close, a lot of times our police department will take them out if they're causing an issue with sight pulling out of a driveway or what have you.
Is ATVs, used cars, side-by-sides, motorcycles, are those considered temporary signs when they're on the right-of-way?
No, they're not signs. They would be,
They'd be number 6.
unless they didn't have a sign on them, then you're just talking about,
I'm being a little facetious.
I know exactly.
no, you're not. You're not being facetious. You're being poignant. They are, what you're talking about is displays illegally put on public property that may or may not be causing site issues. If they are, call the police department. We have had ATVs, four-wheelers, wave runners moved off the right-of-way in the past. Man, all I wanted was an illumination control.
I don't have a question, but I've got a recommendation, and this goes back to the illumination control, and this is something I discussed at the last meeting. I think electronic billboards, I think the wave for that is going to be going lakefront. So as we go through our codes and regulations, we are more concerned with looking at roadways. But I think if I were a waterfront business owner, I'd be slapping an electronic billboard right up there on the water, advertising the live entertainment I have coming up for the weekend, daily specials, happy hour specials, et cetera. We currently have nothing in force or in our codes that would address that. So what would keep any waterfront establishment from basically slapping up a huge electronic billboard?
Nothing.
There you
We
go.
would allow them.
So what I'm saying, well,
We're not in charge of the lake. We're in charge of the roads.
we're in charge of the roads, but we are in charge of the businesses that sit on those properties. And if they're putting signage that are waterfront facing, somehow it's gonna circle back to the city to have to do something about that.
Currently, if somebody came and asked for a digital board that, you know, faced the lake, we would give them a permit for one, provided they didn't have another one on the property. And it would be required to meet these illumination requirements. It would be in a commercial zone, so they could do that, provided they didn't have another one on the property. If they had one on their road frontage, then you could have a second. And basically what that does is that just says they have to decide which would be more important to them, the one on the road or the one on the lake. Now, if we would want to, or the planning commission or the board would want to address the ideology of allowing lakefront businesses to have one for both their lake frontage and their road frontage, then we could certainly do that.
Now, I'm just saying that's something we may want to think about getting ahead of, as opposed to waiting for it to happen. And then you've got homeowners, you've got people complaining because they've got this bright illuminated sign now that's facing their house. You know, when they look out there in their cove, boom, there it is. So something we may want to, like I said,
We also address.
put some feelers out, kind of think through that process or how we would address that.
We also do address light pollution to residential zones, which that would be a part of as well. So,
Okay, just a recommendation.
Any other questions? Facetious remarks, just kidding. Could we take a vote? Or, excuse me.
Need a
Make a
motion.
motion. Anyone?
I move.
We have a motion from Commissioner Blair,
I will second it.
second from Alderman Osteen. Do we want to do a roll call vote? Okay.
Bill McKay,
Yes.
Alan Blair,
Yes.
Gary Jones,
Yes.
Angie Schuster,
Yes.
Nancy Vasselli,
Yes.
Chairman Susan Ebling,
Yes?
Mayor Michael Harmison, Tony Kern,
Yes.
Jessica Rozier,
Yes.
Alderman Bob Osteen,
Yes.
Bill Morgan,
Yes.
All right. Anyone not in favor? Sounds like motion passes. Any other reports?
Just to let you know, I've already said it, once earlier, but, we will be bringing, or chances are it'll be the engineers and Mr. Welty that will be bringing some further changes to water and sewer portions of the design guidelines and in front of you over the next few months. I would assume you all drive through town, you see a lot of the things that we've got going up. Hobby Lobby will be opening in the relative near future, so we look forward to that. And of course, like always, if there's anything you all want to talk about or need, give me a call or Mike a call, and we can certainly get Dave involved as well. So that's all I've got.
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
can you hear me?
yes.
Yeah. If any of you have any of the particular signs you're concerned about, please let us know about those specific signs, okay? Signs are the lawyer's dream because it's a fight that never ends, never gets resolved, always goes to the Supreme Court, and you can build a gazillion hours against it and look very productive and get nothing done. So in terms of people who work by the hour, we love it. But for our enforcement purposes, with what you all were discussing today, if you can get us, and any one of you wants to send us an email and say, what about this sign and what about that sign, we can at least take a look at it and respond to you.
Okay, very good, thank you.
That's all I got.
Okay, if there's no further business, the meeting is adjourned.